Hello, how are you guys doing? My name is Chris A. Matthews, and you were listening to the Marriage Underdogs Radio Show. And once again, we have another phenomenal guest. And yes, they are a licensed marriage and family therapist. I would like to introduce you to yours truly, Chris A. Matthews. So I'm featuring myself today as a guest on the show as a relationship expert. And I want to take a moment and slow down and remind the listeners on how I developed the term marriage underdogs. What is a marriage underdog? Well, a marriage underdog is any person or spouse in a relationship who has a higher chance or risk for divorce. Now, I'm not judging because my wife and we are marriage underdogs. We have a high risk for divorce based on these 10 different research statistics that I was able to identify over the course of helping couples and doing marriage counseling throughout the years. And I was surprised when I did this, research in terms of what leads couples to divorce or risk factors to find out that 7 out of 10 of these risk factors my wife and I actually share. And that motivated me to develop the Marriage Underdogs brand and to write my book, Marriage Underdogs, because I believe in prevention. Prevention doesn't get a lot of attention. Most of the time, when people seek out therapy or counseling, it's to treat an issue. The goal of the show, the goal of what we do here is to provide prevention and treatment. We want the listeners to have access to tools, resources that will help preserve, prevent, and repair issues that may be happening in a relationship. So without further ado, I want to go through these 10 signs and symptoms. If you identify as a marriage underdog, that would look like having 2 or more of these signs or symptoms present. And before I go into the list, I want you guys to know some of these things on the list aren't of your own doing. You may have been birthed or born into some of these things, and you may not have had any control over them. So let's go ahead and jump into the list. The first on the list, marriage underdog statistic number 1. If you are married before the age of 25, then you have a 60% increase in the chances of divorce. And this is based off of the Institute of Family Studies. And I want to break that down real quick because my wife and we got married real young as well. The reason why younger marriages have a higher risk for divorce is because you haven't fully developed yet. Your frontal lobe, your brain doesn't fully finish forming until about 25, 26. And that's where the decision-making components are sharpened in terms of how you think and how you navigate life in the world. So a lot of times when couples are getting married young, they don't know who they are. Nonetheless, able to understand and learn who someone else is. Now, if you got married under 25, it doesn't mean that you're doomed. It means that you have to do more work. I would advise that if you're under 25 or you got married young, make sure you surround yourself with other people, mentors, couples who are older and seasoned, and they can help expedite that growth. And the biggest thing I do in counseling is validate couples, because when we're in conflict, we only think it's happening to us. And that was a big key into my wife and I developing our marriage. We had other people who were married and they could remind us or they can inform us that what we were experiencing was normal. The first 5 years of marriage, I like to call the foundational years. The same way a skyscraper is built by way of a deep foundation, that's how a marriage should be built. And the deeper the foundation, the taller the building. So I tell couples the first 5 years, you're really setting up and learning for next time. You're having conflict to learn how to grow next time. Let's jump into number 2, marriage underdog statistic number 2. You have parents who divorced or never married. This is based off of some research done by Dr. Nicholas Wolfinger, and he wrote a book called Understanding the Divorce Cycle. In his book and in research, he identified that couples who come from divorced households. So that means both you and your spouse have parents that were either never married or got divorced. That would lead to 200% increase in the chances of you two divorcing as well. Not judging. My mother and father have been divorced. My wife's mother and father also got a divorce. The reason why this is a risk factor is because a lot of times couples who either didn't see a healthy, happy marriage or didn't see couples or, parents that were married at all either have poor examples or no examples. And they may tend to mirror or present those same bad behaviors in their current marriage or relationship. So unfortunately, we are somewhat of a blueprint or byproduct of our parents, like it or not. In order to combat this risk, you want to understand traits that may have been passed down. One in particular I've learned throughout the years is that my mother, no slack on my mom. I'm not, disrespect my mother. My mother, she's one who is really expressive and very passionate. And that expression and passion was passed down to me. I had to taper that. And that's an example how you can take traits from your parents and produce them in your marriage, and it may not be healthy. My wife is one who processes. So if I'm very passionate and wanting to solve the problem in the moment, and she needs time to reflect and time to regroup, the passion that my mother passed down to me could be a problem. When I saw my mother and my father engage in distancer and pursuer, right? My father would need time to process, but my mother wanted to solve the problem now. I would witness my mother approach my father and continue to pursue, and my father would distance himself because he needed time to reflect and process. Well, I had to be mindful of that pattern of behavior because my wife needs time to process and reflect. And I'm like my mom, I need to get the problem solved now. So understanding traits and behaviors from your parents can help prevent you from modeling those same behaviors. And sometimes those can be destructive behaviors, but they can also be positive as well. So let's jump to number 3. Marriage Underdog statistic number 3. If you've had a previous marriage before meeting your current partner or spouse, and that previous marriage ended in divorce. So why is that a risk factor? Well, because most first marriages have a 50% divorce rate. The rate increases with additional marriages. So it goes up to second marriages can be between 60 to 70% increase in divorce. And then third marriages have a 73 to 74% divorce rate. So each marriage, there's a higher chance of divorce because people who don't process an old marriage, once again, similar to parents, you're going to take those old behaviors into the new marriage. So despite whatever the reason was that led to a previous divorce, you still need space and time to process that, reflect, and grow. And we as people, we don't like to go through our problems. We want to go around them. We want to go under them. We want to go beside them. But when you go to counseling and you connect with a therapist is going to help you go through. And when you go through a problem, when you go through a process, you become stronger on the other side. So in order to combat that marriage underdog statistic, if you are one who's been divorced or even had a relationship that dissolved and it had a rough ending, take time to process that. Reflect on how you might have been the causation, or reflect on how you may have enabled the partner to treat you a particular way. So you want to reflect on that so you don't take those old behaviors into a new relationship and increase the chances of divorce. Marriage underdog statistic number 4. Living with your partner prior to marriage or engagement. Couples who cohabitate 60% of the time before marriage will eventually become engaged and married. However, it increases the chances of divorce when you cohabitate prior to marriage about to 40%. And I get a lot of slack for this, right? A lot of people come at me for this one. And this was done by way of the Pew Research Center. The reason why living with your spouse for an extended time prior to marriage can create more conflict on the back end is because you don't have the covenant of commitment. If partners are together economically and for transactional purposes, and based on our economy, we see an uptick in cohabitation for shared resources. When you do that, you're in a position where you're operating outside of commitment. And a lot of couples I counsel, and I'm calling out my men for a second here. A lot of men in particular will say it's not cheating if it's not intercourse. That's not true. Cheating is when you breach the boundary. So a lot of cohabitating couples, a lot of men who cohabitate will still engage other women, and they'll produce a fragility in the relationship and a lack of trust, but their rationale will be, well, that's not my wife. Well, developing the foundation of marriage starts before you say I do. So if you're living together and you're entertaining other women, or even the women entertaining other men, you're faltering on the foundation that you're attempting to build on. So marriage isn't the baptism that washes away all the sins. What you do in the courtship phase is going to impact the marriage. So I find that a lot of couples who cohabitated together had breaches of trust, or they had increased attempts at dissolving the relationship, but they didn't go through with it. So either way, it produced a faulty foundation. That way, if you decide to live with somebody after marriage, or at least engagement, you have a commitment there. So it's not going to be this faulty foundation built on quicksand. Let's go to the next one. Marriage underdog statistic number 5. Having children prior to marriage or engagement. Once again, I told you, no judgment. My wife and I had children prior to marriage. We actually had our son before marriage. It was unexpected. And what that does, right? It increases the chances of divorce by 24%. And this was research done by the Council on Contemporary Families. The reason why having a child or getting pregnant before a marriage or an engagement can increase the chances of divorce is because a lot of times there's a peer pressure involved. Couples who get married back in the day, they used to call it a shotgun wedding, right? At that point, it's not about mate selection anymore. It's not about compatibility. It's not about even if we share the same values, goals, life principles, dreams, and visions. At that point, it's solely about the child. So what we see is the foundation of the relationship is developed on the parenting and the children, and not on the couple being together. That produces resentment over time. It produces frustration. And then when the children get older, you'll find that the couples will typically head straight to the divorce attorney because they didn't want to be together anyway. They used the child as an opportunity to try to attempt to create a marriage. One of the things that I made an oath to my wife, one of the ways I made an oath to my wife when she got pregnant is I said, hey, I'm going to learn to parent through the marriage. I'm going to learn how to love you, my wife. I'm going to learn how to love you and develop a relationship, and then enable that relationship to be a reflection of love that I have for my child. And a lot of my friends at the time that were younger and getting their girlfriends pregnant, they didn't take that stance. And none of them married the mother of their child either. I wanted a family, and I knew that family nucleus began with my wife and I. So in therapy or in relationships, you have systems and you have subsystems. So the husband-wife is a subsystem. I wanted to work on that subsystem because I knew that was the most important factor of having a complete family system. So if you've had a child, or if you're currently pregnant, or you're with the partner based on having a baby, don't neglect your parental duties. I'm not saying that. but you need to put more emphasis on making sure you're still learning and growing each other as well. And even for healthy couples that got married, then had a child, children can create distance between the partners because the partners focus more on the child and not on each other in the marriage. So don't neglect the marriage or the relationship thinking that as long as you put the child first, everything will be okay. That's not true. Unhealthy couples can produce unhealthy examples of a relationship that their children will witness and watch as well. So if you are pregnant or have had a child before marriage, make sure that you don't forget about each other and growing that relationship while that child's growing as well. Let's go to the next one. Marriage Underdogs statistic number 6. You had 2 or more children less than 18 months apart. This was based off of a research study that showed that individuals with 2 children born no more than 18 months apart had a 49% increase in the chances of divorce, and individuals with 2 children born more than 4 years apart. So they did a comparison. They took couples who had children born within 18 months and they compared it to couples that had children born with a gap of, roughly about 4 years. The couples that had the larger gap in time between the children had a lower chance of divorce. And the reason why is because with each child, your marital satisfaction dips a little bit. And that's normal, right? You'd have sleep deprivation, you have an adjustment to your family system, you have another mouth to feed, there's attention that has to be expanded, there could potentially be postpartum depression, and men have postpartum depression as well. It's not just a mom thing, right? That's for another video. But the goal is to understand it's normal and it's natural for marital satisfaction to decrease with children. The way we combat that is healthy family planning. Healthy family planning. And I know couples are having children later, and I understand that you have a clock that's ticking. However, do be mindful when you can have that gap between the children, you get opportunities to rebound and reset and get acclimated to the birth of the child. You get acclimated to that process. It does change the system. So in order to avoid the chances or reduce the chances of divorce, have that conversation about family planning. There are too many contraceptive methods. There are too many things out on the market that can help you reduce the chances of pregnancy so you can still engage sexual intimacy and not have to have the concern of having children during a season or a phase of life where you don't want to do that, right? So a lot of that just comes with planning and being responsible. And I'm speaking to the point of having 3 children and only one was planned, right? So I'm not a hypocrite. I'm not judging. I'm just trying to help those that are in the process of having those conversations around family planning. Yes, it is important. Okay. Marriage Underdog statistic number 7. If you are a different race or ethnic background than your spouse, then that can increase your chances of divorce by 41%, compared to 31% of couples that may divorce and they share the same race or ethnic background. So it's not that much more of an increase in risk, but that comes by way of a lack of education, a lack of empathy. And I have several friends who are of opposite ethnic backgrounds that are married and they're happily married. I counsel several couples. I've counseled and I currently counsel couples who are of different ethnic backgrounds. The thing that I find is that the couples who are willing to have conversations about the difference in ethnic backgrounds, those couples create a space of openness and transparency that reduce resentment or issues later on in the marriage. So what does that look like? It looks like acknowledging that it's going to be both of your jobs to be lifelong students on your partner's culture. And different doesn't mean bad. I believe a lot of times that we think that because something's different that it's bad or good, right? No, it's just different. So if something's different, you have to respond to it differently. In other words, you can't approach each culture the same way. So when you have the ability to be coachable, teachable, then your partner can acknowledge you're trying. It doesn't mean you have to agree. It doesn't mean you have to consent to the cultural differences, but to take the time to acknowledge and respect them. So what does it look like to acknowledge and respect cultural differences? I'll give you an example. As I've worked with a couple recently, he's of African-American descent, she's Caucasian descent, right? When there were moments in the media where, as a Black man, he felt unsafe or targeted based on comments said on TV or the radio, or just reports in general, we all can go back to the horrific accounts of George Floyd, right? The Caucasian female partner at the time didn't know what to say, didn't know if she should say anything, so she said nothing. The lack of acknowledgement produced in the African American husband a level of loneliness, and he felt as if his wife didn't care. It wasn't that she didn't care, she just didn't know what to say. So when you don't know what to say that. It would have been better for her to say, you know what, honey, I know that you're watching the news, you're witnessing a man of the same complexion of you being killed right in front of your face. I don't know what to say, but I want to acknowledge that that's a horrific account. And I want to learn and I want to understand what you're experiencing or what you're feeling. So if you don't know what to say, be a student. Let your partner know you care and you want to follow their lead. And that goes across all cultural backgrounds and differences, especially around family. If you feel like you're an outsider around your spouse's family because they're of a different culture or race, let your partner know that. Say, hey, I feel like an outsider. Teach me. I want to be included. Let them know. And that requires vulnerability. Let's go to the next one. Marriage Underdog statistic number 8. You practice a different religion or faith than your spouse or partner. If a person has a strong religious belief, the risk of divorce is 14% less, and having no religious affiliation makes you 14% more likely to get divorced, right? So what this statistic is saying is it's not that much of a difference in terms of if you have a religious belief or if you don't. But couples who do share the same religious belief have a higher rate of success in marriage because a lot of times our spiritual or faith beliefs align with our life principles and our character. So I look at spirituality, I identify as a Christian, and what I appreciate about the Christian faith are the principles and the morals and the values that the religion represents. And I'm not saying that I'm a perfect Christian, but I do like the components of forgiveness. I like the components of how you treat people with love and respect and kindness. I like the components of my faith that talk about the humility of acknowledging a power greater than yourself. So those attributes of my faith, I share with my wife, and that produces a spiritual intimacy, a connection. We believe in the same moral and value system. So don't think of it as a specific religion or faith. Think of it as a difference in morals and values and beliefs. So you want to identify these things in the courtship phase, but do be mindful. When you consider to marry someone and be with them for the rest of your life, that may change. My sensitivity to faith and my involvement in my faith has changed throughout the duration of my marriage. And my wife has been supportive throughout those different seasons. There were points in time where we would practice at a faith-based institution that wasn't necessarily a teaching church. It was more of just a church you go to and you're just going through the motions. And I didn't feel as spiritually awoken at that point in my life. So I abandoned the faith. I didn't abandon my belief in God, but I wasn't a practicing Christian. I didn't pray as much. I wasn't reading my Bible. I wasn't worshiping with fellow believers. And during that season of the marriage, my wife was hurt by that. She and I didn't connect and have that spiritual intimacy. Once we found a institution of faith that we both were comfortable with, it was like joining a family. It was equivalent to connecting with people that wanted to help us grow into those moral values and principles that I mentioned earlier. And there was also a covenant of protection in terms of being able to pray and have those that pray over you as well. It's sending out into the atmosphere that vibe, those energies of positivity. And when you go through hardships and you can lean on faith and a community of faith believers, you don't have to go through the struggle by yourself. So that's a component of religion that I think that, people forget about. It's really about collectivism. And people, we're not meant to be independent. We're not meant to be alone. We are tribal in nature. So you want to have a tribe. And if it's not through faith or your belief system, then what would you want it to stand on? Let's go to the next one. Marriage Underdog statistic number 9. You have a history of cheating or being cheated on in your marriage or current relationship, right? So why is that a marriage underdog statistic? Because when you think about the sacredness of a relationship, it's a shared space that you and your partner are choosing to do together. And a lot of times, infidelity and cheating is not properly treated. Infidelity and cheating, one of the main issues that couples tend to seek counseling for. And the reason why is it's a trauma. Infidelity and cheating usually accompanies triggers and flashbacks. A trigger could be your partner or your spouse taking their cell phone with them into the bathroom, because when they cheated, they were messaging other people on social media. A trigger could be your partner traveling out of town for work, because when they cheated, they were out of town for work. So a trigger, a flashback, that needs to be managed properly. And a therapist can hold that space and help navigate the plan for treatment. And when you cheat, it hurts both partners. The partner who cheated is engulfed in guilt and shame. The partner who was cheated on is engulfed in self-doubt, is engulfed in this feeling of, am I worthy enough? Should I stay? Should I go? What did I do wrong? Why was I not enough? So there's this slew of all these questions that go inside of the partner that was cheated on. And then the partner that did the cheating is just trying to make it go away as fast as possible. Well, that's a really lethal combination. One partner is looking for answers. The other partner is just trying to make everything go away as fast as possible. The therapist can hold a safe space for that process to happen with balance. Because until the partner who is the cheater understands the magnitude and the depth of hurt that they caused the partner they cheated on, you really can't be apologetic. An apology isn't I'm sorry. An apology is essentially the ability to truly empathize and understand and feel the level of pain that you produced or created in another person. Because the hope is that if that person acknowledges that you understand the depths of their pain and you can grieve as they're grieving, then you both can grow through the actions of the hurt and come out on the other side stronger. That process is navigated by way of a therapist who can hold the space for you both, because it becomes emotionally charged, as you would imagine. So cheating and infidelity is clearly something that a lot of couples don't make it back from. But when you get a good marriage counselor, your chances of making it through that process are higher, because the marriage counselor is going to help you grieve that old marriage and rebirth a new marriage. Think of infidelity like a house fire. Sure, There may be artifacts that you salvaged in that fire you can take to the new home, but it's still going to be a rebuilding process. And the therapist can help be that architect to lay out the structure of that new joint home you guys both went together after the infidelity. All right. Now we got marriage underdog statistic number 10. And this one, I really want to highlight. Couples who threaten divorce or mentioning ending the relationship. Okay, one report found that half of all married couples between the ages of 25 to 50 reported having thoughts of divorce, voiced or unvoiced, either currently or in the past. So when we get in conflict with our partner, consistent conflict with our partner, the desire to dissolve the relationship or to make threats to end the relationship come from a lens of safety and protection. We just want to stop hurting. And if we believe the person is hurting us, then in our mind, the solution would be to get away from the person, get away from the relationship. Well, that's not what you signed up for. When you sign up for commitment, you sign up to provide the patience for reconciliation, or at least the opportunity for growth and change. Once again, counseling helps you with the growth and change process because you have someone that's going to hold you both accountable for the growth and change process. When you spew out those sentiments of divorce, we call it using the D word, at that point, you're once again fracturing the foundation of the relationship. If you think about a piece of metal, if you bend metal back and forth too many times, what's it going to do? You're right, it's going to snap. So every time you say to your partner a threat of divorce, that stays with them and it adds up. And over time, those threats produce a self-fulfilling prophecy and actions begin to occur within a marriage as if you guys were not married. I worked with a couple recently and they're fighting through infidelity and they're doing some great work. And when you ask them or one of the partners that cheated what was going through their mind, they said, well, we had threatened divorce so much, it felt like we weren't even married anymore. It was almost like they were preparing to not be married because they had put it out there so much that neither of them were happy and they wanted a divorce. So when you mention threats of divorce, you're planting a divorce seed. And that seed gets watered by negative emotions. The sun of arguments and fights shine down on that seed, right? The soil of resentment and animosity produce a harvest of actions and behaviors which ultimately lead to a divorce. So make sure that you're not threatening divorce. Instead, speak to the behavior and articulate the action that you're looking for change and not the partner. At the end of the day, we're a combination of experiences. That's all a relationship is. And if you're having adverse experiences or interactions that are not pleasant or joyful, speak to changing the actions and the interactions, and that will follow with the person. So, once again, Chris A. Matthews, licensed marriage and family therapist, and your host for the Marriage Underdogs Radio Show. I'm glad we've had this episode because I wanted to go back to the foundation and give you guys the 10 statistics that lead to being a marriage underdog. If you're a marriage underdog, or if any of these statistics stood out, or signs or symptoms are present in your relationship, even if your relationship is going great, still seek out counseling. Seek out a well-trained licensed marriage and family therapist or a licensed counselor that has experience working with couples just to do a check-in or a tune-up. And a lot of couples will tell me, well, Chris, I'm afraid of therapy because everything's right and the therapist might make it wrong. No, the therapist won't make it wrong. The therapist is going to expedite you guys getting to a position to handle conflict before it arises. Because if it's a deep-rooted seed of conflict that's going to be waiting to burst open, it's going to happen regardless of you being in therapy or not. But I'd rather have a safe, contained space to unpack or unravel it before it blows up in my face and in my partner's face as well, and we lead to a divorce. Chris A. Matthews, glad that you guys were able to tune in for this episode. We launch new episodes every Tuesday. I'll be back with a guest. And once again, my goal is to make sure that we keep marriages together. Please, please, please pass this episode along if you know any other marriage underdogs out there. Once again, I look forward to seeing you guys next Tuesday for another episode.